Hi, this is, I'd like to introduce to you the speaker for tonight, who also was our field trip leader this afternoon, where we had a terrific turnout of 36 participants. And most of them said actually, oh yeah, we are going home now to participate in the Zoom meeting. So anyways, Fred Roberts is the oak expert in Southern California, or maybe in California. He has written several books, and I brought them here so you could see the most, the biggest one in volume and picture, and I think in attraction to the regular lay folks, not the botanists, is this Wildflower of Orange County in Santa Ana Mountains, co-produced with Bob Allen. And he has several annotated checklists, Western Riverside County, Orange County, and what was the other one I don't have?
Oh, vascular plants of Orange County.
That's here, okay.
Oh, that's the checklist. That's really
Ah,
old.
okay. That's how old we are. When we started, it was a long time ago, 30 years ago. And we went to Fred Roberts then. He had the Oaks of Southern California, and that was what, you know, when we learned about oaks. So he's currently also the editor of the Crossosoma, which is the Journal of the Southern California Botanists. And the botanists among you, I'm sure, have heard about Fred Roberts. So
he's also a very accomplished artist.
He is a very accomplished artist. Thank you, Ty. And I'm modeling one of his shirts. So yeah, he has terrific t-shirts and cards and watercolors, all with botanical and some birds, right?
Yeah, mostly birds.
Mostly birds. Well,
Some plants.
okay.
We should have a table at our plants. I think we should.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so yeah, Fred Roberts has many facets and many things to offer, and tonight he's going to offer our presentation about oaks in LA County.
I'm gonna steal that top. I'll get this going in a second. I just wanted to comment on that, just so you know, the Crossosoma, this is the very last printed issue of Crossosoma that we're doing. We're going digital, and after it's digital, anybody who wants to read it can get it. I'm sure many members forget that we even do it sometimes, so because we're kind of late, but we're getting caught up. But I just thought I'd mention that. Another little task that I ended up taking up that was a little bit more challenging than I thought. Okay, so I think they pretty much covered my trans. I actually do more plant paintings than I do bird paintings, but it's pretty even. I just haven't figured out how to sell bird paintings on t-shirts yet. That's on it. Okay, so I think, am I just starting this thing here then? Do I just go?
It is started. You just need to put your into presentation mode, however you do
Oh,
that.
okay, how do I get the presentation done? I mean, I know how to play on this. You mean on this thing?
No, just on your slide program. There we go.
All right. All right. Well, hopefully everybody can see that. We can see it at this end. Looks great.
Looks great on this end too.
Okay, good. There we go. All right. So this is, in case anybody is in the wrong presentation, this is Oaks of Los Angeles County. This was a new one for me, although I discovered something very interesting when I was stringing this together. Los Angeles County has a lot more species of oaks than I thought it did. I always kind of thought San Diego County was the creme de creme place to go. And there are some species that you don't get here, and some really nasty taxonomic issues that don't really affect Los Angeles County. So I kind of like that idea. hang on, we're doing some sort of technical thing here. It's okay, I give her permission to do this and just sort of jump in here and
Okay.
cause trouble.
Yeah, so I'm causing trouble, and if you could just hit the little, see the little minimize this window portion,
Okay, okay.
or drag it over to the side so everyone
Okay.
can see.
I've
your
lost my
slide.
cursor. Where'd it go? It's
Okay.
doing something.
It is doing
Okay.
something.
All right,
Maybe we can't do that. Sorry, everyone.
okay. It's funny, I can't quite.
Doesn't want us to do it.
Well, I think it won't do it once it's actually in the presentation. Well, you know, if I take it out for just a second, I should be able to do it.
Oh, yeah, you're
There we
right.
go.
You're
We
right.
haven't gone anywhere yet. This is like jumping in a car and you haven't gone anywhere yet. So it's okay to go out and get the thing you forgot in the house. You don't have to drive back 50 miles. All right. So again, this is Oaks of Los Angeles County. And the I'll just go ahead and start into this thing. As some of you probably know, I had written an illustrated guide to the oaks of the Southern California floristic province. And I've had many people say, is there any way you could shorten the title on that a notch or so? But I kind of like that title. But oaks were one of those things where I started out with virtually no interest in them when I was going to student at Santa Barbara and got most of my real interest in doing field botany the correct way. We've learned plenty of how to do it without doing it. For example, I knew all about the big Munns books, but apparently I didn't really know how to read them right until after I went to the university. But I used to call everything that was an oak pretty much Quercus ocus, and I was happy with that. Sometimes I missed those days. Just about all of them. That's what I want to say to people when they come in with all these really weird oaks. I want to say, oh, just Quercus ocus. Anyway, so I got involved in some folks at Santa Barbara that were really, really into oaks, and they were working on a new species they were trying to put together. It turned out it was an old one. This is the story where we ended up with Quercus damosa, and it was originally going to be something else, and it was pretty funny. They were going to call it Quercus moranii after Reed Moran on the San Diego Natural History Museum. I just recently had an opportunity to talk to Kelly Steele, who is one of the people who inspired me to do this. She didn't remember that little detail, but I used it every year in one of my oak things, so I always remembered it. But I really got interested in oaks at that point and started chasing down this oak that was supposedly found only at Torrey Pines and found it in 8 places in Orange County. So that's kind of an exciting way to get going. And then spent the next several years explaining the whole Quercus damosa thing, and eventually decided, you know, it'd be kind of fun is I want to do some drawing. So I'll just like illustrate some of these oaks and I'll write a book around them. And that actually be how I got really known for my oak stuff. Anyway, so oaks of California, or oaks of Los Angeles County, as you've known, everybody pretty much has an idea what an oak is. That's not true of all our plants. Some of them you really have to try to sort out. You may not be able to tell which species of oak you're looking at, but you'll know an oak when you see one. Well, most of the time. Some of the scrub oaks get kind of tricky. That's, you can mix them up with red berries and stuff like that. But they're a very important part of California's ecosystem. Virtually every major habitat on the west slope, and if you aren't too high, has an oak somewhere associated with it, and many habitats are almost solidly filled with oaks. You know, we literally have oak gallery forest or hillsides, or just Quercus agrifolia, coast live oak, and chaparral hillsides covered with California scrub oak. So that's a very important. A lot of wildlife has developed in association with oaks, and it's the one group of plants I think that well, sort of pines, that just about everybody is going to recognize. It's a nice little shot of a gallery forest. It kind of gives this nice foresty look. Now, a lot of times you get these ravines in California, the mountains and canyons filled with oaks. It's not because you've got water running down the base of the canyon. It's because the hillside is providing enough shade that it's essentially acting as if there was more rainfall there because you got less evaporation. And that's why we often end up with our these forests in the canyons and stuff. But you also find oaks, again, in like chaparral habitats. Well, scrub oak chaparral, for example, obviously that's got oaks in it, but usually you find them mixed in with other things. And then you can also find them, well, some of our forests to get the higher mountain areas, the San Bernardino Mountains, San Jacinto Mountains, San Gabriel Mountains, they've all got areas where we've got a lot of oak mixed in with the pine. If you tend to find the oaks more in the San Bernardino and San Jacinto's, I think, than the San Gabriel Mountain, but it's got its areas that have them. And then here's my book that you can only get. I understand you can still buy them on Amazon for $700 or something like that. But that's because they've got some weird speculative thing on Amazon. I never quite figured out how they work that. I don't even know if the people actually have the book. But anyway, I am working on a second edition of that book. And hopefully we'll get it out soon. If I don't get a lot of work this year, I might actually get an opportunity to work on some of these book projects that I have. I'm working on 3 simultaneously at the same time, and it's sort of kind of crazy, but trying to get back to this one again. Probably 2025, actually, but. So oaks are also important in over North America overall. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's a large, important group of trees. In our end, you might look in like southeastern Arizona, for example, southwest of Tucson, you'll get these sort of savanna areas. That's the photo up at the upper, the right, yeah. Oh no, your guy's left, right? Okay. The upper left, is that right? I don't know. That photo over there, okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. I've always had a little trouble with left and right, and apparently it's just not gonna grow out of that. And then back east, you've got them basically as an important part of many of the forests are made up of oaks. Their oaks are a little different than ours. They lose their leaves a lot. They often have big leaves and they're often really tall trees. You don't get many scrub oaks in the back east. And then if you get places like Mexico, which is the lower photograph, that's where oaks get really kind of wild. For example, one of my favorite places to go was the Durango Highway out of Mazatlan. And in that 294-kilometer road, there are 42 species of oak. That's pretty impressive. Here's some examples of oaks that aren't local that are kind of interesting. Like in Arizona, for example, we've got Arizona white oak, Quercus arizonica. I forgot the common name for Quercus hydroleucoides, but it's always been one of my favorites because it's really super bicolored. Basically white, silvery underneath and dark foliage on the outside. Quercus gambli, this Gamble's oak is pretty much, that's sort of similar to lobata. And then oblongifolia is interesting because that actually is essentially almost the same thing as Quercus engelmannii. It's a little smaller leaf, but otherwise it's the same color and all that. And when Engelmann's oak was first found in Pasadena, actually is where it was first recorded, the thought was that it actually was just a variation of Quercus oblongifolia. I think it's some really interesting ones in Mexico. The Quercus laureana, the leaves look like laurel. And then if you look down the Quercus magnolifolia, I like the camera cap next to it. Those are really big leaves. So you get some really spectacular differences. It was kind of fun to find out that California does actually have one of these kind of peculiar leaf oaks, but it's just one that's a little hard for most of us ever to visit. That's Quercus sadleriana, which is a white oak. I think they call it deer oak. Found like in the Trinity Alps, for example. Apparently it does not come in contact with civilization erodes over much of its range, but it really doesn't look like something you'd see around here. It's a little reminiscent of the magnolifolia down below, but it's about the same size as the smaller leaf. So it's a big leafed oak. But just sort of a quick look here, where is oak diversity important? California is doing pretty well. It's got 21 species of oaks. And if you look back east, a lot of those states have more species of oaks than we have. But the interesting thing is that very different on distribution. Mexico, you end up with a lot of species that are more localized. So those species that might be, say, in Sonora may not be in Oaxaca, for example. And there's even one oak in Cuba. And I think it's down to Colombia as far south as you get those. But if you look at this a different way, so how many of these oaks are found largely in that state, near endemic, not necessarily they're only found in state, but maybe they're just found in one adjacent state or something of that nature. And the board looks really different at that point. Then you can see where California really has the edge on everyone. 17 species of our oaks are pretty much almost California endemic oaks. And the next runner up in the United States is Texas, which started out with 50 species, but only 7 of them are really Texan oaks. And nobody back east practically. It's because the oaks that are in Florida are always all in Illinois and such. You know, Mexico's a little bit trickier on that, but it's because they're little tiny states. So here's just sort of a sweeping overview of a mosaic of all the oaks we've got in California. Just give you a feeling, we've got a pretty good diversity there. And then this is how many, oh, by the way, Quercus Sadleriana is the one that says Kevin Nixon on it. That's his photograph on there. That's really pretty oak. So how many of these are here if we just look at Los Angeles County? It didn't change very much, did it? You could do an illustrated guide to the oaks of Los Angeles. It's good for the whole state practically. That's actually what I thought about San Diego too. But you know, LA gets a few of these things from the north that just barely make it south, or that, whereas San Diego is getting stuff that just makes it in from Baja California. So it's kind of a fun little, obviously it's a nice county. Now, there are a bunch of those that only are found on just 1 or 2 locations in Los Angeles County. So it's kind of cheaty, but they're there. I think that was what happened when I originally wrote my book. I thought that was going to have half as many oaks in it. It's going to be shorter, and then discovered just about everything's in Southern California. There's like, I think vaccinifolia, Sadleriana. Those are really the only 2 full species. Well, parvula, but we've got a parvula down here. So most everything is in Southern California. So anyway, so just a little overview. The oaks are they call the Fagaceae, the beech family. And we've got several different groups, several different genera in there. We've got Chrysolepis, Quercus, and we've got Lithocarpus, which they recently tried to confuse us with because we knew it for years is just Lithocarpus. We had to put the notho on there to throw things off. That's how Latin is these days. You know, we keep changing the names on them, and somebody's going to be convinced that the common names are the the things that don't change as well. So anyway, the main differences between these different genera is largely the acorn cup. If you look at Chrysolepis, it's just a really nasty, spiny mess. It's not the kind of thing you want to put your hand and squeeze. And then Nuttall, the scales are a little bit more rational. They're still kind of sharp, but they're at least look kind of like elongated scales. And Quercus, we've got the more characteristic acorn cup that most of us are familiar with. So it's pretty easy to tell a genera once you've got them here. Oops. Oh, yes, this is. So then the second element is, now typically in flowers, you often look at the male and female flowers. You look, or a lot of plants, you've got the male and female all in the same flower, which makes it really easy. But it kind of, the male flowers are in catkins in the Fagaceae in the beech family, and they're not really that useful for taxonomy. If you see here, there's the ones like Lithocarpus are a lot longer. The Chrysolepis ones are denser, and the oaks are thinner, but they don't really help you much in text in looking at stuff. So you usually don't see those brought up much in the way of keys. But there are several important identification characteristics that are good to know if you're looking at oaks. One of them is if you're trying to identify these things is understand what you're looking at. Is it basically a tree or a shrub? Of course, that turns out like everything else in biology, that's never quite so clear cut as it could be, because you're going to find shrubs that are kind of tree-like, arborescent, and you're going to find trees that look like shrubs, but maybe eventually they'll become trees. And you've got some of them where, well, if it doesn't burn long enough, the shrubs will become trees. So it's not always real clear, but most of the time it's not that bad. We can certainly tell the really super tree-like ones from the shrubs. Then we've got the leaf shape is important. So you're looking at these things, you're looking to see if they're deeply lobed, if they're got teeth, if the margins are smooth, that is entire. The color of the leaf is sometimes important in these different groups. One that's a little tougher for the average person on a hike to just deal with is the minute stellate hairs that are on the leaves, the trichomes, because they really are tiny. So a hand lens is often not quite enough to really see them. But there are a couple species where if you can see them clearly with a hand lens, that tells you that you're working with a certain group. Like, for example, one of our local oaks here, the most important scrub oak in the area is one of the ones you can see the hairs with the eye. You don't need any fancy litigation. But the shape of those hairs, the length of the arms, the numbers and densities can all play a part. Unfortunately, like we found with everything else like oaks, they're not necessarily the magic bullet because they work sometimes, and sometimes they don't work as well as they could. And then finally, the acorn cup. Oop, there's another little closer picture of the trichomes. You can see those little things are really tiny. Those pictures are probably about a couple, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters across. So they're really tiny. Trying to find the right macroscopic equipment is really important if you're doing the oak identification. And then finally, there's the acorn cup, which is largely important if you want to know which group of oak you're involved in. For example, if you've got scaled acorn cups in red oaks and you've got tubercle or warty acorn cups in the golden oaks and the white oaks. Now, if you're back east, they would have whole classes on using bark as an identification character on your thing. That's because, of course, for a third of the year or so, sometimes the trees have no leaves, so it's kind of hard to work with them. In California, we're far luckier. They have leaves most of the year. We do get a few deciduous ones, but that deciduous character itself tells you almost automatically which oak you're working with. So bark is important, and I actually need to pay more attention to it than I do, but because we usually can figure it out between the acorns and the leaves and the hairs on it, we can figure out what it is. I hardly ever get around to actually looking at the bark, but that doesn't mean the bark can't be also used as an identification characteristic. And as I mentioned earlier, the males are kind of left out in this. The catkin, kind of interesting to see it there, but it doesn't help you a bit with identification. I guess the red oaks have longer catkins than the white oak. So, but if you haven't figured out by the leaf that you've got a red or a white oak, you're probably gonna have trouble with it anyway. This is something kind of new that has come to my attention because we're having some controversies with one of the scrub oaks in San Diego County, where you've got Team Berberifolia on one side saying that this is the key shrub species, and then you've got Team Acutidens on the other side, and they're kind of having it out. But I think the truth is neither one of us knows the full definitions of these things. But it came up that one of the things you're looking for in the hybrids had to do with the cotyledons. And I don't really think of cotyledons a whole lot in oaks. I've known about this for a while, that we've got this deal whether they're fused or not. And it turned out the cotyledons are actually the acorn nut. And for some reason, I didn't pick up on that. You know, one of those things you just never really look up. You know it somewhere in there. So this is actually more for the classes, but I just thought it was kind of interesting to throw that if you have a fused acorn cup, that's at the top, or acorn, basically it's a block. It's a solid block and it doesn't separate. Whereas if you got like most of our things where the cotyledons are free, the nuts actually separate. So you can break it apart because it's a clean thing. It's really, really important when you're dealing with Quercus angelmanii because it's the only oak in California that has fused cotyledons. So if you're wondering if you've got a Quercus angelmanii and it's got acorns, you could actually break that open and check if it's got fused cotyledons in there. The nut is fused. It is definitely angelmanii. There's no other oak in California that has that. Gets a little trickier with the other ones, though. Now, then there's 3 main groups. I'm not going to go into great detail with these because I'm trying to go faster on these particular ones. But we've got good, I haven't changed this yet. Turns out that now everybody's adopting red oak for what I used to call black oaks. That's again the one that Coast Live oak is apart. And that one, what we're mostly looking for is that the acorns have flat scales and the acorn fruits mature in 2 years, with the exception of Quercus agrifolia, Coast Live oak, which I've discovered from one of my customers in Jerusalem is special because there's only one oak in the Mediterranean that has red oak that actually matures in just 1 year. So it's apparently a pretty unusual thing to have that. That's pretty common with the white oak group where they all mature in 1 year. So in the golden, most of our red oaks, the leaves are pretty much glabrous, that is smooth when they're older, hairless. All oaks, when they first put their leaves out fresh, usually have some sort of hairs on it. And it can sometimes fool you a little bit because you think this thing looks kind of pretty hairy. It's actually just a juvenile character for that particular leaf and it'll disappear shortly. Golden oaks, Protobolanus is the oldest group. I think they've got fossils back about 50 million years. So it's been around for a while and it's probably the original things. There's also several other groups of oaks that are not in North America. Like for example, the one that the cork oak is in. So in golden oaks, they have a warty acorn cup that can sometimes be pretty darn big and massive in ours. They mature in 2 years and they either have a golden or silver hairy and they're kind of waxy. The white oaks is the most common in Southern California, section quercus, and they have a warty acorn cup, with the exception of one of them that sometimes doesn't. And acorns mature in 1 year and they've always got hairs on a leaf, whether you see it or not. If you get a magnification out, you'll see they've got those hairs. And that's the one that we usually use the trichomes for identification on. Oh, gee, I forget this all the time. I'm supposed to keep hitting buttons. So that was the oak or the acorn and a little series of pictures I had there. There's our massive acorn cup. Golden hairs. One day I will actually remember to do this while I'm actually here rather than just talking. Just showing the hairy leaf and stuff. Okay, and then more important, this is Pippin. It's very suspicious of oaks. Oh, actually, he's very suspicious about what I'm doing, period, right here. It was unfortunate. We had a previous corgi named Durango who was in many of my programs. And Durango was a trooper. He'd go out with me. He'd go on surveys. He'd struggle through the coastal sage. He'd be right there and he'd deal with it. Pippin, wait, you want me to step off the trail? Are you kidding? This is grass. I'm not stepping into that. City boy all the way. Whoop. What's happening here?
Careful, careful. No, don't do that. Don't do that.
I got something to work it here. Oh, it's doing it again. Did we lose something? Dang it. Well, my thing's stop. We can't get off Pippin. Pippin is demanding attention here.
Do you want water?
Okay, hang on here. One way to get this. Oh, I can't do that either. Did somebody take over my computer? Is that what's going on here? Well, that's really interesting. I can't back out either. I get a thing came up briefly. It said something about you're doing something, Orchid, and
People ask for different things on Zoom.
it came up with a chat thing or something. I'm not sure what it was, but maybe I hit the wrong button.
But
Oh,
your
it's
mouse
locked.
has disappeared too.
Yeah,
What about escape?
I tried that.
Somebody's on mute.
Yeah,
Orchid can-
Pippin won't come off. But yeah, it's really stuff.
Escape out of it.
Oh, if it's going
There we
again,
go.
maybe.
Yay.
All right. I'm not sure what that was about. And where am I?
The computer's just like you do there.
Yeah, I think someone else was running a show. Well, it doesn't look like it's actually on the, oh, no, I guess it's on the screen. I think it's changed its format just a little bit. Okay. Now I remember where I was. Okay, here. That's why I like technical glitches. They throw me off and then I get lost someplace in my program and I don't recognize it anymore. Black oaks. Is that where we start? We must start there because I don't think we skipped over anything. Let me just check. Yeah, that's Pippin still. Okay. All right. Okay. So the black oaks. Okay. I forgot to take this off my workshop mode here. Got the two up there. So in Los Angeles County, we've got 4 species of black oaks, coast live oak, California black oak, Santa Cruz Island oak. Whoop. Sorry. Number 3, ignore number 3. That one's not on Los Angeles County. That one just got forgotten to be removed. Okay. And interior live oaks. There's 3 interior, 3 different oaks here, and then 2 varieties for one of those. No, no, Santa Cruz Island and Lompoc. Actually, I think that's its full range, Santa Cruz Island and Lompoc. So the first one we're looking at is the most common and widespread one, the one I expect all of you recognize, and that's coast live oak. And you can see it's fairly widely distributed in Southern California. It's one of our most widely distributed oaks. And the only reason it's not in some of those areas is because of what it's been built on. Yeah, a lot of the coastal areas, obviously LA Basin and Orange, it's largely because there's just no habitat for them anymore. There once was habitat for it. So a large tree with a fairly rounded crown, and it lives in almost any kind of habitat we have that's got a little bit of moisture in it. Typical habitat. This is a site in San Diego County near Lake Sutherland, showing you what a nice oak woodland looks like here. All Quercus agrifolia. Then we get the gallery forest. This is the situation where it's not necessarily because we've got a creek running down this, because the creek is probably intermittent anyway and only there for a short time of the year. It's because we get just enough shading because of the slopes that it cuts the evaporation down. It's like having more rainfall. And so you get these woodlands developing in areas that be more comfortable in Central California. But you do also get Quercus agrifolia growing out in odd places, just on hillsides with coastal sage scrub and stuff. So it can tolerate drier conditions. It usually stays smaller and more shrub-like when you see it up in those areas. And here's the classic acorn for Quercus agrifolia, the coast live oak, basically scaled acorn cups, sort of a spindle-shaped acorn, and it almost always has lines, striking lines on it. And then the leaves are mostly noteworthy because they're dark colored. They're sort of bowl shaped a little bit. They're largely without hairs on the underside, what they call glabrous, except for, and you can't really see it too much on that photograph, but usually there's a tuft of hairs in the leaf axil, in a couple of the leaf axils, and that's how you can separate Quercus agrifolia. One of the constant challenges up here, particularly if you work with iNaturalists, is people pop up all the time with Quercus oxydenia, Quercus agrifolia oxydenia, which is really more of a southern form. It's a little tricky because there's one of those things where the oak hasn't read the book, so it doesn't know it's supposed to have a little bit less or a little bit more hair and stuff, and it's a little bit intermediate. But just for if anybody's familiar with that issue up here, whether they've got it or not, I've got a picture of that one here. And it literally, for a good Quercus agrifolia oxydenia, it is literally white underneath and very, very densely hairy, not just a handful of hairs here and there. But that doesn't mean that we get some that aren't. And well, keeping in mind, we've got Engelmann's oak up here in Pasadena, so we might have a couple influences from peninsula ranges going on here. The other significant tree at higher elevation, and one of the most easily recognized oaks in Southern California, is California black oak, Quercus kellogii. It's basically a tree. It's deciduous, so it loses its leaves. It's found mostly in the higher elevations. It's just barely found in Los Angeles County, a couple of places like the Libre Mountains and up around Mount San Antonio area. Probably a little bit more widespread than that. I made these maps a little while ago, and I need to go back and revise and see with all our newer information we've got, if we've gotten a little bit of distribution changes on these. But basically, that's still about it. Here's a typical habitat you would find, Quercus kellogii, basically pine oak forest. You find a lot more of that in the San Bernardino Mountains and the San Jacinto Mountains, but there is some in the San Gabriel Mountains. San Gabriel Mountains are just a lot steeper than the other ones. Most defining character on this is a large leaf, and it's got really deep lobes on it. That makes it pretty easy to separate it from just about everything else. Now, if you're back east of the Mississippi River, it'd be a tough one because there's lots of oaks look like that. But in California, we don't have many oaks looking like that. And of course, one of the other aspects of it is that they turn yellow and they fall off. So deciduous character is also important. This is another large acorn species, very nice, big, about over an inch long and a little bit on the heavy side. Then we got interior live oak, which is another montane species, generally living in lower elevations than you find Quercus kellogii. It's an evergreen shrub, or it can be a tree. There's two different varieties for it. If you look at the map below, you'll see that the tree form is red. There isn't a whole lot of places. There's actually more now known than that, but still not a whole lot. And the shrub is actually pretty widespread. It's a very common constituent of chaparral. The tree form is much more common farther north. This is a typical habitat you would see. The shrub form of interior live oak. Usually has a relatively flat green leaf that's not bicolored. It's pretty much the same color on both sides. Often sort of a lanceolate shape. Can have teeth or it can be entire. And the shrub form, the leaves are not of moderate size, not particularly large, an inch and a half or so. That and no hairs on them. So you can kind of usually tell. You can see here's one that shows that they're not always pointed. And it's got a pretty typical acorn shape. Most of the acorns, particularly in the white oak group, all look kind of similar. So they're not as helpful as they could be, but it came in context with your stuff is. So here's the shrub again. Pretty much looks like a shrub. And I guess it was showing this. Oh, this is just showing a tooth leaf on it. Okay, here we go, the tree one. So, but we do have a few places where we do get the tree. And there's always been some controversy about whether the trees, at least in Southern California, are just really old shrubs that became trees. Because one of those ones where it could be that the ecology is driving some of it in Southern California, or the honest good just trees. But one of the things that's a little different is the leaves tend to be much larger on the tree form. And if you get to Central California, Northern California, you don't run into the same kind of doubt because there's a lot of trees up there. It's one of the more dominant trees, unlike just sort of scattered loose around here. And the other thing that's really interesting up north is the acorn cups tend to actually be stalked. Well, we don't see that much in Southern California oaks. So in fact, none of the species I'm talking about tonight have stalked acorn cups in Southern California. Had I been talking about parvula, it was left on the slide, it might have done that. But so that really does suggest that there are two different taxons, there are different subspecies or varieties. Now there are hybrids in the red oak group, but it's not necessarily a lot of hybrids. And it's hybrids come in two different flavors, really. There's the ones that tend to be very widespread, and then you get the ones that kind of just have an individual here and there, roughly around where your two species come together. And this is one of the examples of that. Quercus morehouse or Quercus oracle oak. It's usually just find a few scattered individuals here and there, some place where you've got coast live oak and sheer live oak coming together. And it shares some of the characters on there. Oops, sorry. Is that Kalagii and Kalagii and Wislezinii growing together. That's where we go. Because it actually it has a deeper tooth leaf on it. And the acorn on it is pretty much a standard California black oak acorn. Usually we see it as a shrub most of the time. In fact, for 15 years, I only saw it in a shrub form. And then we did a class up in the San Jacinto Mountains, like 2007, I guess it was. And it turns out there really are tree forms of this. I just had not seen them before. And that's one of these here. Now, some of the characters of Quercus Kalagii and Wislezinii coming together. And this is Chianti, who he's actually more help around the house with trying to like sit on my computer board or something of that nature. She's a bit of a show-off cat. We've learned that tuxedos are all a little bit of show-off cats. She also likes to have cats visit, which is kind of weird for a cat, but oh well, kitty friends, you know. But the golden oaks, we've got, this time we really do have three of them. I get the right number here. Canyon live oak, Quercus chrysalopus, Palmer's oak, which is just kind of barely in Los Angeles County oak. And then there's island oak, which we've got out on Catalina. Yeah, it's San Clemente Island too, I think, now that I think about it. So here's canyon oak. It's another mountain species, tends to live in two different modes. It's a shrub, it's sort of dry hillsides, or if it's down in the canyons and ravines, it tends to be a big, gorgeous tree. So here's the tree form. This is probably on Palomar Mountain in San Diego County. Pretty distinctive. And then there's the shrub form. What's kind of interesting about the two of them is that, the tree has these relatively large leaves. They're very smooth. They're very bicolored. So you can see this really, really light underside, sometimes a little waxy, sometimes it has that gold or a little bit of a silver hair on it. And then the upper surface is smooth and very dark green. It usually never has teeth on the edges, very entire leaf. And then you've got the shrub version of it, which is, it's still bicolored, but otherwise it looks like it's an entirely different plant. So that's kind of interesting. And that's the, in this case, it's dry versus moist sites. I'm sure somebody at some point thought about making them into different species, but that never quite happened. They do totally integrate though. You can get spots where it sit right in between. That's why I was meaning about the large acorn cup, the massive acorn cup you can get in golden oaks. You have this acorn, gonna keep my eye on my time too. This thing is, it could hurt somebody if you throw it out. It's pretty impressive. But which is interesting is that it's probably triggered something to do with the higher winter rainfall, because once you cross over into Mexico and you're now in an area where the summer rainfall is more important, the acorns are much smaller. The acorn on you're right, okay, is also chrysolis, but it's only about half the size of the acorns you would get up in the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains. And it just looks like it's right at right at the US boundary is where it changes. The other one, I don't even have the dot on the map for LA. It's just one little tiny site on the north side of the LA, of the San Gabriel Mountains where 1940s or so that there was a collection made. It looks pretty good though for Quercus palmeri, which is really interesting. It's more of a southern oak, has these very stiff, kind of brittle leaves. They've got little spiny, lots of spines on the teeth. And they're one of those where if you try to grab it with your hand and you squeeze it, it's gonna really hurt. And it's not gonna, they call it brittle, but I think your hand goes first if you do that. It's really sharp stuff, but it makes it easy to identify. Oh, that's Quercus palmeri. And here's a close up of the showing the leaf margin on these. And you know, you can actually see they look kind of nasty and spiny. It's a hard one to get on a field trip. I haven't found many good routes to get Quercus palmeri on a field trip. It's usually kind of transitional to desert habitats where you find this thing. One of the distinctive characters about Quercus palmeri, if you've decided that hurting yourself with squeezing the leaf wasn't enough, is that the acorn cup actually sort of forms a little umbrella over the acorn. So it's just kind of cute, yeah. But it makes it very distinctive. No other oak has this sort of flared out acorn cup. And the last one in the golden oak group we've got is Quercus tomentella. I've not been able to get to one of the islands and actually get a picture of it yet, so I had to get it out of a botanic garden. But you can see for LA County, it's both on Catalina and San Clemente Island. It's got a relatively large acorn cup, and one of the more distinctive characters is that it tends to also be relatively bicolored leaf, large leaves, against like, you know, like that. And they have sort of a chevron pattern, really very obvious veins that look impressed on from the upper side, so it makes it pretty distinctive. He's just so cute. I've got to throw him in wherever I can, you know. You notice I've been throwing in animal pictures as I break between groups, partly to remind me that I'm going to the next group. And to make everybody laugh because they're cute. If Pippin were here, he'd have everybody laughing. Okay, so white oaks. This is our problematic group in Southern California. And also, of course, it's our largest group. We've got 8 species in Southern in Los Angeles County. That's an impressive number of oaks to try to keep track of. Unfortunately, half of them are really distinctive. The other half are not quite so distinctive. So probably the first one we run into in most books, and depending on who you talk to, is the most common of the scrub oaks in Southern California. The whitey group is California scrub oak, Quercus purpurifolia, but it's pretty widespread, although there's a gap in northwestern LA County because it's filled in by Quercus serratia gibberellensis. So it's kind of interesting. Usually find it in chaparrals and all kinds of different habitats. Here's just a picture of a typical leaf. It's not necessarily a lot to say in terms of the description on it. They tend to be a little bit rounded sometimes, but elongated. They often have various teething. They can be smooth or they can have teeth on them. But one of the characters that stands out on it is it doesn't seem to have trichomes or very few trichomes on the upper leaf surface. And it doesn't nearly as dense on a lower leaf surface as some other species. And usually only has fewer than 9 arms on the actual trichomes. This is how bad it gets with some of these oaks. You sometimes are counting the trichome arms. In San Diego County, does it have 16 arms or does it have 9? You know, of course, that's hard to tell with the hand lens. Really nice with a really expensive microscope, though. The digital and projects it on a 65-pin monitor. That happened in my last oak class. It was a lot of ooh and ah when they saw that. I don't think people ever appreciated trichomes until they were the size of their fist. And the typical acorn. A lot of the scrub oak in Southern California, the white oak group, the acorns all kind of look very, very similar. And I would defy anybody to really use the acorns to separate them out because there's enough diversity and variety in the shapes that you can find some overlap somewhere along the line. But never hurts to have a feel for it. Oh, this one's supposed to be out. You get, oh no, that's right. Well, there's some debate. Quercus corneus might be in Los Angeles County. If you're working on an iNaturalist, a few people think they've got it. And it was one record that was actually supposedly looked at by Tucker, who was one of the oak experts, who called it John Tucker or Cornus mulleri, but they just really out of position. You have a right road program, right? I'm supposed to get rid of that one. Sorry, ignore that one. Ignore that one too. I didn't apparently clean this quite as well as I thought I did. Hopefully I got rid of some of the other species. All right. So, and then we have blue oak, Quercus douglasii, which is just barely gets into Los Angeles County in the very north and mostly in the Libre Mountains area. And it's another tree species. And it has relatively large blue-gray oaks or leaves. And sometimes the color is a little bit more consistent even than Angobanii. A lot of times you look at these oaks and you look at the color, kind of depends on the sun angle you hit it at. Some angles it looks really blue and other times it still looks pretty green. But there's a little bit of lobing on the leaves. So that's one of the distinctive characters. Leaves are pretty good size too. They're usually over 2 inches up to 3.5 inches or so. And then one of my favorites is, of course, Quercus demosa, Nuttall scrub oak, which is pretty much a coastal oak. There is one site in Los Angeles County that's been verified by, it was found by Dan Cooper. And I think it's near Torrance, actually, where it's kind of an old intellectual left behind habitat, but somehow managed to miss. So we looked all over the place in Santa Monica Mountains and areas. Like we never managed to find this thing. So it's kind of fun that someone finally eventually found Quercus demosa in Los Angeles. It's really more of a San Diego, Baja California thing. And of course, this was one of the challenging that got me into oaks in the first place, because originally that was kind of lost. Thomas Nuttall originally got it back in the 1830s in Santa Barbara. And then evidently 2 other species were named in the next 20 years, Berberifolia and Acutidens. And somehow I guess the demosa got kind of forgotten, or well, maybe those guys way back then were really aware that demosa looked different. And then the original demosa seemed to have gotten lost, and people pretty much started applying the name demosa to just about everything in California. And it stuck for a long time. And when we switched it out, it got a little bit troublesome. But they were definitely different oaks. And when they realized when they're trying to name this new one, they finally got to see the type specimen, the original one that was the oak was named on the basis they always have one specimen, which you can kind of go back to. This is what this name is based on. When I went to that and realized that Quercus demosa had been named a long time ago, they gave up on the new name, but it also meant we had to start calling everything that we've seen something else. So the transition was a little rough. And I thought this was kind of funny. So now we know that Quercus demosa is found only in this coastal strip of Southern California. If you go to CCH2 today and load in a map, that's what this is from actually, I think from this morning, you will still see Quercus mimosa going all the way up to Napa County, just like it did if you were looking at this in the 1960s. Because it takes a while to get it takes a little while, particularly in the collections, for people to go through and put and rename these things. And it's now been 30 years and we still haven't got all the names thing. It's a little better on newer platforms. If you look at iNaturalist, they're a little closer to the actual distribution. It's a little tricky there because they've obscured everything, so you can't really tell where the oaks are. But they still have a few in the Central Coast, and I know those are wrong. And California just follows a combination of things. So California looks a lot like this. Oh, this is basically found in a lot of coastal habitats. The habitat that's left in Los Angeles doesn't look anything quite like this now because it's just a little tiny fragment of habitat. The leaves themselves are pretty distinctive. They're tend to be kind of roundish. They're very dark upper surface. And the most important thing, if you turn the leaf on its side, you can actually see the hairs, unless your eyes are starting to go bad. A lot of us now are starting to have that problem. And they just disappear on you. But you can usually see the hair. The average person can see the hairs without any kind of magnification. So that's a really nice thing. And unless you're familiar with Quercus dorata gabrielensis, up here it's a little bit more problematic because it does the same thing. But over the rest of Southern California, this is just a clean character for us. It's just a little closer picture showing that a little bit more obvious. You can see right there that even just a normal macro shot, you can see the hairs. Very dense vegetation usually. The branches are often reddish on it. They're very sharply angled. One of the other fun things, it loses leaves like no one's business. This is a fun one. Another way you can tell you've got Quercus mimosa, if you put it in a plant press, the leaves all fall off. And that usually doesn't happen with most of the oaks. But then see the bases of the shrubs and stuff are really, really dense with leaf litter. Part of that is because Quercus mimosa, even though it's an evergreen, supposedly, actually isn't quite as evergreen as we used to think it was. In fact, it turns out it's sort of semi-deciduous. If it's a cold, dry winter, it can lose every leaf on it, just like you would find a deciduous tree. Yeah, and that's just an example of one in the Data Point Hills, a very old oak. We've been monitoring it since the early 1980s, actually. That's unchanged, but it just, it's really super dense. I mean, that's different than what you would see in Berberofolia and Dorata. It's a really dense oak. Not a leaf that's fresh on it. It all looks great now. If you come back after a rain, it looks nice. This is the only one of our white scrub oaks that actually can have acorn cups that retain that juvenile character of having scales on the acorn. But apparently not all of them. It doesn't work very well in San Diego County, but it's great in particularly Orange County and Torrey Pines, and Santa Barbara does it this way. Then of course, here's the oak that you guys are mostly familiar with. Quercus dorata variation gabrielensis. It's our basically common chaparral species at mid elevations in the San Gabriel Mountains on the south slope. If you look at the map, it's really a very small area. This actually is found to be fairly closely related to Quercus berberifolia, and possibly even more closely related to berberifolia than it is to dorata. So folks like Victoria Sork at UCLA, who's been doing work with these oaks, he actually kind of thinks it should probably be its own species, but none of that has actually been worked out yet. I just was other lines thrown in there showing that it's kind of interesting. You see the influence of gabrielensis far beyond that little spot. There's even evidence that some of the oaks in the northern Santa Ana Mountains are being influenced by this. And that the fact that we were finding hairier oaks down there was throwing us off for years. Where is that coming from? The east side of San Diego County, that seemed like an odd spot, but it turns out this is a likely source for it. Again, just showing some of the habitat you typically find on, I don't remember which ridge this is. Now it's above Rancho Santa Ana, or California Botanic Garden, sorry. Often a little bit of a cup shape to the leaf, but not very much. Relatively spiny. I guess revolute, they can kind of call that. But you can usually see the bicolor with a lot of hairs underneath. There's still a lot of hairs on the upper surface, but they're not as long as the ones underneath. A more robust oak, actually. Very hairy stems are often seen on it. Sometimes a pretty good sized acorn on it too, a little bit more larger than some of our other species. So maybe in this one, you could actually use the acorn a little bit. Engelmann's oak. really, you can see by looking at the map, that is really more of a San Diego centric oak. But we've got this band again at the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains in the Pasadena area. And actually the oak was originally found in Pasadena before it was found in San Diego County. I always wonder about those old things from they picked this thing up and they didn't really have a floor or anything. You just sort of threw names on things, you know. Or the top botanists only knew a little bit more than we do today. So this oak, you know, it's a tree for the most part. It's got fairly long, oblong leaves that are often smooth margins, and they have a kind of a blue-green cast to them. That's usually a pretty distinctive oak if you've got a nice one of these. Very, very much like a larger leaf form of Quercus oblongifolia in Arizona. The acorns are a little smaller often, and they stick out of the acorn cup a little bit more. And here's a really kind of interesting one for our area. In fact, in Southern California, only occurs in Los Angeles County. That's Quercus carriana semota, the Oregon oak. Fairly common in the Sierra Nevadas and parts of Northern California and up into Oregon, but really not a Southern California oak. But then we've got a population up in the Libre Mountains. And it's kind of interesting. You have this big, sprawling, scrubby oak, and then it's got all these leaves that don't look like any of our scrub oaks in California, in Southern California. But it's also deciduous. So if you go up here like for today, it probably doesn't have any leaves on it. So that's kind of an interesting thing for our scrub oaks too, because we usually think of those as evergreen. Another acorn, it's got a relatively good sized acorn. It's Quercus John Tuckeri, which is basically our desert edge oak, but it's also a common oak in the interior central or coast ranges. And it extends off into Riverside County, but really more of the desert edge up in Los Angeles County. It gets a little bit farther in. Again, iNaturalist is one of the ones where you get to problems where some people are identifying these on the coastal slope, and I think they're almost all incorrectly identified when that pops up. But it's really hard to say for sure because oaks are funny and sometimes they get in places they're not supposed to be. It's a typical habitat. This was after with the Aliso fire, station fire. We have gotten into some of that habitat for a number of things. As you can see, most of the shrubs here are Quercus John Tuckeri. It's a little bit nondescript. It has typically can have a little bit more of a gray colored leaf. One of the characteristics is that it has uneven teething. So instead of being parallel teeth, that one side might have 4, one might have 3, and they don't quite match up. One of the ways you can separate this from one of the other ones. Some of the scrub oaks get really challenging sometimes when you're trying to tell one from the next. And so unless you get in the localities, half the time you don't know what you're really looking at. Then we've got another tree, Quercus lobata, which is found mostly in the Santa Monica Mountains, Zimi Hills, and those areas, just barely getting to Los Angeles County on the west side. Although there's probably a few scattered ones that are lost that are in other areas because we get them as far south as Orange County, just isolated ones. A tree, deciduous tree, very distinctive lobed leaves, unlike California black oak, though it doesn't have teeth at the end. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but it's how you separate these two largely is because it's a duller green, more of a blue green, and it has rounded lobes versus Kilauea having sharp teeth, pointed teeth on it. Very, very large acorns on it. A little bit more spindly than some of the other white oaks. We have island oak, that Channel Island oak, Quercus pacifica. This is one of probably the newest described oak in California. And I think even then it's still, we're talking like 1991. So it's even that's almost 30 years ago that they did this. And it's found pretty much only on the Channel Islands and in Los Angeles County, just Catalina Island, where it's very, very common. And it's a little bit bigger than Quercus purpurifolia, but it fills in the same habitat. We would see it. Basically, here's the hillside of it. So it's a little bit larger than your standard shrubs, but that also might be because maybe they just have less fires on Catalina. So it's had a better opportunity to grow a little larger. kind of a nondescript leaf. They're larger. They usually have a wedge-shaped base, a rounded edge. They don't really stand out super strong in terms of the various individual characters. When you throw them all together, they tend to make something. And of course, what most people say is, well, it's on the Channel Islands, so that's got to be Pacifica. These way, a little bit of variation involved in that one. Here's the acorn cup. Again, no, it's not really somewhat distinctive from the other acorn cup so much. So then there's white oak hybrids. This is where we get most of our problems with our oaks in Southern California. If we didn't have hybrids, we wouldn't have many issues with identification. But there are few barriers, few genetic barriers, and it's a very, very promiscuous group. They just, they're just constantly mixing up all the time. And they're very common, and sometimes widespread to the point where they might be the only oak you see that day would be a hybrid, which is very different than you get in the red oaks. And they're often complex and difficult. And they're the ones I hate most when people come in, and about 70% of the people bring me oaks that are hybrid. So it's like, well, of course, they wouldn't bring me the ones that were easy, right? And then sometimes there's the possibility there might actually even be multiple parents, because what happens is we get a cross and then it back crosses. If it back crosses the same species, that means it's just kind of reduces the amount of genetics here. Well, it can keep going that direction, eventually push it back to the original species. You could also get a situation where it's going back and forth, or we've got a third species mixing in there, and it could get kind of a messy thing. This can all happen on one hillside too. It can all happen in 4 bushes in front of you. So it makes it a little challenging. And here's the list of names you've got for stuff. And right there, you can tell that it's going to be a little challenging. We've got John Tuckeri by Douglasii, which is Quercus alverdiana. We've got Angomanii by Dorada gabrielensis, which is Ewanii, but was for a long time known as Quercus grandidentata. It turned out the name grandidentata is, I think they've actually described it as illegal, but that's a taxonomic term. They didn't throw it off in jail. It was just that it was not properly published, or they did something haywire with it. But that's fairly recently that came up. And then we got Quercus macdonaldi, which is lobata by Pacifica, but that's confused because for many oaks, like for example, hybrids on the mainland that were called macdonaldi were actually lobata by berberifolia hybrids, which means that they're not macdonaldi because it's a different origin. That's kind of what happened with Ewanii too, because you end up occasionally being called Ewanii down in San Diego County, but it's the wrong set of parents, And then we've got other possible combinations we don't see very often or just are not reported very often. I don't actually know of an example of Dumosa by Angomanii. There should be some out there somewhere. Dumosa by berberifolia, that's a tricky one because it would look a lot like just about everything else. You would have just maybe a little bit more hairs or something. And I'm pretty sure some of them are misidentified oaks or ones where they've had trouble. They'll turn out to be one of these combinations we expect. Dumosa by Dorada gabrielensis. Now that one, supposedly we actually have a couple examples. The folks, Kevin Nixon and Kelly Steele actually did annotate some oaks that way in the vicinity of Verdugo Hill. So that's complicated. I don't even know how you recognize that because you're taking 2 long-haired oaks, throwing them together, and what are you using here? I don't know. But maybe the leaves fell off. I don't know, but I haven't really run into that one much. So here's the type for Quercus ewanii, or actually or grandidentata actually, which is now Ewanii, but that probably looks a little different than the ones people have been calling. If you look on that, there's a fair amount of Ewanii popping up on it, and very few of them look like this. But that just shows you again, oaks can be very, very variable. So, just because a type looks exactly like something, don't assume everything's going to look like the type. It could be a little bit more variable than that. You've got to get familiar with it, the whole group. Yeah, this is when I'm dealing with a lot of that. I sometimes wonder why I got into oaks. It just kind of causes headaches, but I keep coming back. So there's something cool about them anyway. Then here's macdonaldi, the actual macdonaldi. This is out on Catalina Island, where it's basically large-leaved Pacificas that have a bit of deeper teeth. That's a pretty good indicator that you've got macdonaldi. Usually a tree. We had one down in Orange County. It was called macdonaldi for many years, but it didn't have any Channel Islands oak into it, so it wouldn't really be true with macdonaldi. Actually, it was berberifolia by lobata, but the names just go back and forth. And of course, because of some of the AIs that work with the databases, I noticed that sometimes they get called Quercus acutidens just because the CCH portals apparently have their own judgment about what a hybrid would be. And here's Alverdiana, which is basically a smaller leaf version of Douglasii. It tends to be a little bit more tree-like, but maybe half tree, half shrub, kind of arborescent sort of thing. And the leaves are smaller than you find Douglasii, but usually a little bit larger than you find in Demosa. And often they have a little bit of a bluish cast, and they can have uneven teeth. This is the one I'm not very familiar with, and that's one of the things that stopped me from writing in Northern California illustrated guide, just because I had to figure out that hybrids up north might be an entirely different thing. I'll say that actually, was that the last one of our ones? Oh, we still got more. Okay, sorry. Okay, well, here's an example of what happens when you get berberifolia mixing with lobata. And so the leaf, one leaf looks a little bit more like you'd expect lobata to look, a little bit thin or a little bit shallow on the cuffs. And the other one, just the big leaf with kind of a little bit teethier, but these are growing right next to each other.
Where did you find?
Was that?
Where was that?
Oh, this is actually for Morro Canyon down in Crystal Cove State Park. Yeah, I don't know what I'm actually thinking. Was that?
Where'd the lobata come from that far down?
Well, there was a really nice example of there before the 1993 fires and before the floods immediately afterwards washed it into the ocean. Now that's all that's left of these, but at one point there was a 40-foot tree there that looked for all intents and purposes like lobata. And which is really weird too, because it was like, we're talking a mile from the coast, which is kind of close for the coast for lobata. You know, it's just, yeah, that's pretty south. And I think it's just likely if you went down, now if you dropped in 90,000 years ago, there was probably a lot more lobata down there. That's what it boiled down to. It's kind of a relative population down there has survived. That went, lobata was much farther south.
I've had some beautiful ones of those in Santa Clarita.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's only two left in Orange County. There's a lot more influence in the San Joaquin Hills. But I did notice when I stopped and looked at some oaks, out of 1,000 oaks, just went on one of the trails down there. It looks like a lot of the oaks in there are hybrids between berberifolia and lobata, which is maybe one reason why people are having trouble in the Santa Monica Mountains. Forget that lobata can hybridize with berberifolia and create another mess in there. And I think that's what's going on in the Santa Monica Mountain. So interesting. And I think that's it. Yeah. You know, he's always looking over his shoulder. Pippin does that a lot. He's always looking over his shoulder there. And then just maybe before you get questions, I just wanted to leave up on the screen. People sometimes ask me about my shirts. So I have a website where you can look these things up. And an example for the oak shirts, usually there's $19 quick to include tax. There's a couple examples there. All right, so we got, what's that? No, I don't have that anymore. That's the problem with it. I sell the other books they have there, but it's supposed to be, that's why it's FMR Publications, because I was working on books. Somehow the t-shirt business just, stole the whole thing, but oh well. Yeah.
Okay, so in the chat, George Yang asked, is the Quercus lobata cross with berberifolia evergreen? Could you please expand the evergreen of the hybrid? Probably explain the evergreen of the hybrid of one deciduous and one evergreen parent.
Okay, so the question basically is Quercus lobata by berberifolia hybrid evergreen? And there's a pretty good chance we don't actually know, since some of us haven't been visiting. The only thing we've got some anecdotal information from the early 1980s. We went out and visited this population, and everything had its leaves. And that suggested that maybe they all are evergreen. Even the big tree had its leaves. Although more recently, somebody who is more of the person's not necessarily all that super knowledgeable, but would bring up the point you hadn't thought of because you overthought the thing. That was, although sometimes right on the coast, things don't lose leaves the way they do in the interior. So is it really because they're evergreen, or is it because it's basically has a beach life and it doesn't really need to lose its leaves? So we don't know yet on that one.
The ones I know about that, oddly enough, the big lobata looking leaves fall off and the smaller other Berbertifolia looking leaves seem to hang on.
Okay, so one of it's for those that have Zoom that didn't hear that, someone points out that they found at least a couple instances where the larger leaf forms tend to lose their leaves, the small ones may not.
Okay, another question about, could you please comment again on the relationship between Quercus gambellii and California native oaks? They talked about it at the San Diego Botanical Garden last year in a workshop.
Well, I didn't necessarily know they had a specific tie between those. I think gambellii is actually, it's closely related to one of our oaks, but I don't remember which one. I think gambellii, I think the idea was that gambellii may have originated in California, but I don't remember that one. I'm not really familiar with that. Wait, hang on, we got one question here. We'll ask this one here.
Are the acorns spread differently, like the large acorns more squirrel spread and the pointy ones are shrub and acorn woodpecker? And is there a difference between the round? Do the acorn woodpeckers not like a round?
So the gist of this question is, does the shape of the acorn influencing who's eating it? Basically, if you've got long, sharp, pointy acorns, does it make a difference versus the narrow, round ones? You know, unfortunately, I don't watch the squirrels and stuff very much. So I don't know if that has, and it might. I mean, it's very possible that acorn woodpeckers might be more interested in acorn that's longer and narrower, that it's easier to match their bill shape. So I could see where that could be a thing, but I don't know that for sure. I do know that the wider acorns are more frequently used by the indigenous peoples here than the other ones. Like, for example, lobata and stuff, the larger acorns, both, I think, but coast live oak still is used pretty well, and that's pretty spindly. So I'm not really sure I can answer that one. Now I can tell you which of those acorns that they're eating, if I do.
I just thought it was interesting how these, they get spread around.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I just don't know how they spread from that. I think they just all get spread by squirrels and birds pretty much. So, yeah.
I think it's whatever they have there where they are. Acorn woodpeckers up in San Bernardino Mountains with mostly black oaks are using black oaks. And down here, they're using, live oaks. And it's just whatever.
Okay. So one person pointing out that maybe there's probably not any great difference in the shape used. Okay.
Another question from the chat, Barbara Eisenstein is asking, comments that they have some old Quercus lobata in South Pasadena, and there is what looks like a pre-development large oak that looks like a cross between Engelmann and lobata. Acorns have some pointed tip, but not as large and pointy as most lobata. Leaves are larger and more lobed than most Engelmannii. Are there known hybrids of those two species?
They hardly ever get in contact. Pasadena would be the place if they're going to be around. And obviously, they're the same group. Engelmannii seems to be mixing it up with everybody else, so why not lobata too? But no, I've actually not seen a single specimen for that. That just doesn't mean it isn't there. That just may be the only one there around. Now, again, had we all been here in 1850 and when there was a little bit more Engelmannii around and habitat, we might be seeing more of what's really going on. But again, that's one of the problems that happens as civilization advances. We actually lose parts of the puzzle, and sometimes we're left with those little pieces wondering that. But yeah, so the question basically, if I didn't repeat it, was that apparently in Pasadena there's at least one oak that appears to be a hybrid between Engelmannii and lobata, which would be a really interesting combination. And certainly very, very plausible. I just haven't seen it, but it's got to be rare. Engelmannii and lobata just don't come together very often. So, yeah. Oh, we got a question behind you. Oh, no, you, yeah. Okay, so what was the question? I couldn't quite hear it. Oh, cork oaks? Probably not. I think cork oaks are actually in a different group. The oaks hybridize like crazy amongst each other, but they do not cross groups. You do not get red crosses with red oaks and white oaks. You don't get golden oaks and red oaks crossing. So it's always kind of funny. If you're not familiar, you'll see occasionally something will be identified as a Quercus agrifolia, birbidifolia hybrid, and that doesn't happen. So again, the question, because I probably forgot to repeat it again, was wondering if cork oak will cross with our native oaks as cork oak is becoming more common. But I'm pretty sure that cork oak is actually in a old world group of oaks. It's actually a pretty small one, I think. And so probably it doesn't hybridize with any of our oaks.
Yeah, I was checking the Quercus tuber, the cork oak is in section Ceres.
Okay, that's a different, definitely different group, section Ceres. So cork oak and what was the other one? I forgot it already.
Lobata.
Oh, Lobata. No, not Lobata. You said something else. Oh, no, you were saying two oaks when you said cork oak and you said another one.
No, she just said.
Oh, never mind.
Barbara Eisenstein was the one, was the Lobata and then.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm still working on the cork oak here. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Anyway.
what about Ilex?
Okay.
Is that also another group? Which? Quercus Ilex?
That's the one I was thinking you said, but yeah. Yeah,
There's a lot of that planted.
Yeah. Quercus ilex was the one I was trying to think of. It might actually be in the same group as cork oak, but I can't.
It's in yet another.
Okay, it's in
section.
a fifth group. Okay, never mind. Okay, it's Quercus ilex in another group. Yeah.
Maybe islands, but I'm trying to figure out the ones that grow around the golf course, around by the Rose Bowl. For a long time, I haven't figured out what they are. They look a little bit like an olive tree. They're very
Those are
large.
those islands.
Those are non-native.
Italian ones.
Okay.
I couldn't quite hear the question. I apologize. My hearing has a very short range, so.
I've been trying to identify the ones around the golf course by the Rose Bowl for a long time.
Okay.
Maybe islands that look a little bit.
I like that
olive
voice.
tree or something.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not familiar with those. There's a question about oaks that are growing by the Rose Bowl. Unfortunately, I've never been over there, so I don't know what it is. Probably Quercus ilex is a good chance, good candidate. That's one that's often planted. It would remind me a little of an olive, seeing it. So, but I can't tell you without going near and looking. Although somebody's probably posted it on iNaturalist, so.
On what?
iNaturalist, it's a citizen science thing where everybody's posting pictures on, of local, supposed to be wild stuff, but often isn't being cultivated. I'm pretty sure someone's probably posted that one on there somewhere. Okay, we got one more question down here with.
Lobata is described as the largest North American oak, and I don't know if you endorse that. It's certainly a pleasure to see one of those guys acting in its own microenvironment. There was so much habitat around it. Is Lobata the largest North American oak?
So is Lobata, I've got like about half of that. This is one of the challenges with a Zoom conversation. I'm trying to be good and stay in front of the computer. I usually wander 2/3 of the way out into the audience so I can hear people because of my sound range. So I don't know, just could somebody get the just a.
Lobata, he's heard Lobata is called the largest North American oak. Do you agree?
The question was, is Quercus lobata the largest American oak? I don't actually have any idea. It's certainly one of the biggest ones, but I don't know about some of the oaks back east could be pretty large too. I have heard it said that it's definitely going to be one of the top largest ones for sure. I would not doubt it. It was the way the habitat has a lot of much more open areas. It's probably taller than the eastern trees, but I haven't actually gone through the book and looked for that yet. So.
Okay, another question on the chat from George Zhang, asked, would you do a workshop about oaks of Baja?
Yeah, that would be interesting. Be fun to do. At one point, I actually knew the Baja oaks pretty well. Challenges with the Baja oak was you can't get specimens like you can up here. It's a little trickier because the oaks are so widespread or scattered. 1/3 of the oaks are in the Cape region and the other half are in the very far north into the state. So that collecting trip to get pieces would be really tough. I think there's not that many species down there. It'd be fun to do that. I don't actually have plans necessarily. I have occasionally done classes up here that are basically oaks of the southwestern California floristic province, and that picked up a couple of the Mexican ones there, although one of those Mexican ones got tired of that and moved up into the United States. So Cedro Census now is in the US in San Diego County. When I first started doing oaks, we thought it was only in Mexico. So yeah, so that's Peninsula Aris is still missing. Otherwise, I'm trying to remember the name of the other ones. Some of the other ones are actually found on the mainland in Mexico, also you get down in the Cape region. But, yeah, but probably not. That's repeating again, for the question was, like, going to be doing a class anytime soon on Baja California oaks.
Okay, another question from the chat. What's your favorite personal favorite LA oak? And why?
Well, it's probably gonna end up being Quercus demosa, just even if you only have one site, because it's just always been my favorite oak because of the history I have with that one. So, which is my favorite oak, that would probably be Quercus demosa in there.
And what exactly is your history with it?
That's the one I mentioned where, before I had gotten involved with Quercus demosa hunting, that what was my history with Quercus demosa was, before that, I didn't care much about oaks, but after dealing with the folks that proposed it, again, is Quercus moranii, never came out that way, no official name for it. And I happened to find some of them. But actually, I guess what really got me interested was they had shown pictures of this oak from Torrey Pines, thinking it only lived at Torrey Pines. I know where some of those are, near my house. Actually, I knew even more where. There was a whole giant stand of them they built my high school on. I was not happy about that. But I recognized it as soon as I said, wait, those are the oaks that were behind Dana Hills High School. Okay, fun question. All right, everybody's happy now? Everybody's nodding their head. I think, oh, we want to go home, it's late. All right. I gotta figure out how to unshare this thing too.
How to unshare, right here, stop.
Okay.